Bonjour Hakim, bonjour.
Salam alaikum, Leila, how you doing?
Bonjour, ça va, tu vas bien Hakim?
Alhamdulillah, khair, comment allez-vous?
Donc on va débuter ce deuxième webinaire. Donc merci à tous d'avoir répondu présent aujourd'hui. Je me présente, je suis Leila Fadouache, responsable marketing et communication à Mobiblanc. Et là, on va enchaîner avec ce webinaire. Pour rappel, on avait initié un webinaire il y a environ 2 semaines qui consistait à mettre en avant les différentes approches d'AWS par rapport à un déploiement à haute performance. Et pour faire suite à cette série de webinaires qui a pour thématique le cloud AWS, on va entamer une nouvelle session aujourd'hui avec Monsieur Hakim Arazal, qui est notre expert consultant DevOps AWS. Et donc, on est ravis de l'avoir parmi nous aujourd'hui. Et il va présenter, je le laisse présenter ce sujet d'aujourd'hui, et il peut se présenter aussi par la suite si tu veux donner plus de détails par rapport à ton parcours, etc. Voilà, merci beaucoup. Je te laisse la parole, Hakim. Merci.
Thank you so much, Leila. And it's been a pleasure again meeting you and meeting the Mobiblanc team for the second time for this webinar. Let's start with a quick introduction. As you might know, my name is Hakim Aghazal. I'm a senior AWS DevOps consultant. I'm also subject matter expert and AWS business accredited. My experience was mainly around the AWS arena as a subject matter expert in the US markets. So we've been in the recent years we've been working more often with the US customers. That's why we've been adopting this AWS cloud technology solutions. And we've also been working hands to hands with our dear partner, Mobiblanc, in the previous year or so. And within that year, we've managed to actually close multiple projects, and we've managed to establish some sort of expertise in the Moroccan market from the cloud standpoint. To be more specific, AWS. And it's a pleasure today working with them and actually having them with us here in the webinar, and together working towards pretty much raising knowledge when it comes to AWS migrations and AWS best practices and so on. Now, with that being said, today's presentation is mainly about, or today's webinar or subject is mainly about the AWS large-scale migrations, concepts and strategies, right? So when talking about AWS, the first thing that pops up is AWS migrations. Okay, so that's the biggest elephant in the room that needs to be addressed. That's why we've decided to take it as a subject. Now, without any further ado, let's jump into the agenda of our webinar. Okay, so in the agenda, mainly we'll be going over the business drivers to migrate and pretty much modernize, right? So what actually triggers the businesses to actually think about migrating to AWS, moving to phases of migration. Okay, what are the phases of migration? Actually, theoretically speaking, a technical deep dive on the, I would call it the mental process of R's, right? The different R's of migrations. And finally, the migration acceleration program. And by the end of the session, we'll have a quick Q&A session so that we can give you guys a chance to ask us questions and to answer your concerns and questions when it comes to the subject of the webinar. With that being said, let's jump straight into the main subject here. So the focus throughout will be on the focus of this webinar will be mainly on lessons learned from the thousands of enterprise customers who have actually successfully migrated to AWS, and the thousands of enterprises, as you can see, or companies ranging from startups such as Airbnb and Pinterest to actually large banks, right, and hedge funds such as Goldman Sachs and Capital One, even going through the streaming providers such as Netflix, HBO, Comcast, and so on. So thousands of nonprofits, organizations, and large-scale enterprises that are now host AWS and that trust AWS to host their most important workloads. So mainly the webinar is about the lesson learned from those large enterprise that adopted AWS in such early stages, and how they actually leverage that to maximize their profits, business-wise and technical-wise as well. So yeah, that's mainly again a reminder of what we're doing here, and pretty much what this webinar is about. Without any further ado, okay, so based on our experience, right, and the experience that we've encountered with different customers, whether they are in the US or in pretty much the Europe region, I have found that each customer has multiple of reasons to use AWS, right? From the dramatic improvements in operational resiliency, security, reliability, operational excellence as well. To be basically that's one of the most that's one of the common factors why pretty much customers are going heavy toward AWS, and also to compete globally, to be able to compete globally, right, as a business, and that is very important in nowadays era. But the most, I would say, the most common reason that runs through all conversations, right, is that of cost reduction. So the ability to migrate and to reduce the cost burden of the continual and intensive effort that is required to maintain those traditional on-premise systems, and instead leverage some sort of globally on-demand secure building blocks that allow customers to focus on their precious human talents onto pretty much customer-facing opportunities, right? So if you manage to separate the precious human resources within the organizations to focus on rather maintaining all rusty on-premise systems, and move them to actually focus on customer-facing opportunities that would actually bring revenue to the company, that is a powerful catalyst. And that is one of the main, I would say, reasons that actually keep occurring. We're talking to customers that are about to adopt or that are already adopted AWS, that is of cost reduction. That's very important to keep in mind pretty much. And let's take, for example, the Live Nation company here, right, which is basically a US tech company, pretty much a unicorn, and they've actually delivered around via adopting an AWS successful cloud migration within 17 months. Of course, they've actually managed to deliver around 58% of total cost saving, right? And they've increased their availability. They increased the innovation pipeline by multiplying that by 10, which is pretty much huge. And that actually allowed them to go faster than what was actually comfortable. So it's you can see the impact of the AWS already going through the tech companies. Okay, so now with that being said, there's always a, I would say, question that actually keep occurring in every single executive briefing session, I would say. And customers keep having these kind of doubts and these kind of concerns when it comes to AWS. And the main concern again is how can we go really fast into our migration, because we need to ensure some sort of business continuity, right? So we want to make this migration go really fast, but at the same time we want to do it the safe way. So how can we go really fast but safely? Those are one of the most common, again, concerns that keep repeating within every single executive briefing hearing that we are having with different customers, and we'll definitely answer that in the short upcoming slides. Okay. All right. So the most important lesson, I would say, throughout this talk is that executive sponsorship is the biggest, I would say, enabler that needs to that needs to be in place for any successful large migration to succeed. Okay, so keep that in mind. It is what we call the executive sponsorship. Now, in my experience, this is best when I would say a senior leader empowers executive leaders from the front and has established some sort of a bold, declarative business goal to migrate to the cloud. So that's what basically executive sponsorship is about, and it is a key factor in leading what we call an AWS migration, a successful journey of AWS migration. So the single threaded leader, as we might call it here, okay? We call it the single threaded leader or the senior leader executive, has the ability actually to ensure some sort of a holistic cross-executive engagement, right? Assign resources, remove impediments or bottlenecks, and establish cadence. And that is the main mission of this single threaded leader that we're having on top of the task force of the AWS migration within the executive sponsorship phase. So it's very important to mention that. Now, having the single threaded leader to bring all their peers on the journey is pretty much a crucial element as well to success. So if a silo or a single team tries to do it on their own, problems will arise definitely. So at its best, I would say it requires some sort of a holistic effort, right? As you can see here, we have the senior executive leader, but the senior executive leader is working hand to hand with the different team members across the different departments, the different, I would say, senior leaders as well. From the legal standpoint, right? The chief finance officer, the head of infrastructure, head of delivery, the CCOE leader, which is pretty much Cloud Center of Excellence leader, and so on. It's very crucial that that this kind of a leader bring those peers together in the journey so that they can succeed together and they cannot work otherwise, right? So that's also pretty much important, and I find that is crucial to mention. And without mentioning the fact that in order to succeed this, you need to have some sort of you need to put in some sort of a holistic effort, right? And when talking about holistic effort, um, talking about, for example, having a leadership team, right, meet weekly, if not bi-weekly, to remove any impediments, get answers to questions, and ensure some sort of consistent momentum, right? We need to ensure that the consistent momentum is maintained when it comes to migration. So that's pretty much the shared goal, is to initiate the momentum and to protect the momentum when it comes to migration. And it requires, again, conducting bi-weekly meetings, if not weekly meetings, within the task force. The task force contains the different senior leaders, right? Those senior leaders are basically overheaded with the senior executive leader, pretty much, when it comes to AWS migration. So that's how you should put in that some sort of that's our approach to put in the holistic effort that is needed to succeed every single AWS migration within a large-scale enterprise or within a large-scale organization. Now, another thing is creating, or another best practice or another lesson learned actually is creating what we call the CCOE, which is the Cloud Center of Excellence. Fundamentally, right, this means pretty much bringing together all of the technical performance to establish your first cloud pattern when using AWS into a dedicated team, right? So the best team composition basically should have AWS infrastructure engineers, security engineers, application engineers, operations engineers also, and those are pretty much managed by what we call a lead architect. So it's very crucial to have this kind of a task force established before the migration. It's very important and crucial to have the center of excellence. It's fundamental to the migration. Okay, so the goal or the mission of this team, basically, this team defines security objectives, availability objectives, reliability objectives, operational excellency objectives, and compliance of course objectives. And one of its goals is also to get the first workload into AWS, get a first MVP running in AWS, establishing the first MVP. So that's one of the missions of the Cloud Center of Excellence, right? So defining the security standards, defining the reliability, defining the pretty much the operational excellence and availability and so on, in order for the MVP to meet the expectations of the customer. So that falls under the responsibility of our CCOE within the company. Now, I would say at the start, right, if you're just pretty much starting and you're thinking about AWS, it can actually be a little intimidating as a company. Okay, so especially when you're faced with, I'd say, thousands of applications, right? Maybe even hundreds of thousands servers. So it can feel a bit overwhelming and intimidating and stressful. But here's the thing. It really doesn't have to be like that. So we can break the opportunities down into basically three phases. That's how we do it, right? Which in turn can form waves of migrations. Okay, so first thing first, it might seem a bit, the whole process might seem a bit stressful and intimidating, but once you approach it from a different angle, breaking that process into three different phases, each phase basically will form waves of migration. Then it becomes understandable, digestible within the company, and easier to follow. And that's what we'll be pretty much discussing in the upcoming slides. All right, so basically the three main phases, theoretically speaking, all right, in which we divide the whole process of migration are pretty much assess, right? You need to assess the migration, build your business case, so to speak, mobilize, and then migrate and modernize. So don't worry about those terms. We'll be going over those, explain each one of the terms, theoretically speaking, and pretty much deciding on their approach within the migration process as a whole. All right, so let's start with assess. Now, within the assess phase, there are pretty much three mechanisms available to you. Firstly, the AWS Migration Evaluator, right? And all working with the AWS Cloud Economics team to help establish your business case. Now, within the AWS Migration Evaluator phase or sub-phase, you can actually benefit from the help of AWS itself because it will provide you with some sort of cloud economics team, right? And that's to build pretty much your case business-wise. Secondly, working with the AWS solutions or programs process architecture to carry out a migration readiness assessment. And finally, I would say establishing the use of the AWS Migration Hub. Now, when talking about the AWS Migration Hub, automatically speaking, we're talking about monitoring, tracing, and tracking. So the broad definition of AWS Migration Hub is basically a real-time location, right, that can provide clear oversight of all of your migrations and their progress, metrics, pretty much, and so on when it comes to the migration of the different components of your solution or of your architecture. So the whole information and service information and services are pretty much, from the metric standpoints, are pretty much guided within the AWS Migration Hub that we might find here within that we should find here within the assess phase of the whole AWS migration process. Right, so that is the assess pretty much phase. Right now, let's move on to the let's dig a bit deeper into the assess phase, and let's move on to the AWS Migration Evaluator, right? Also known as the inventory discovery. So the migration evaluator is, I would say, a complementary service to create data-driven business cases for AWS, right? Cloud planning and migration. So the technical deployment of the AWS, as you can see here, migration evaluator is pretty much straightforward 101. So using a dedicated Windows server of 2012 or greater, and it then uses pretty much agentless connectors to bring back the technical information in encrypted form to a central location that you control, such as, for example, S3, using the KMS for that. And it also supports VMware, Hyper-V, and a number of bare metal servers, such as SQL Server. So that's in details, right? Technically speaking, the AWS Migration Evaluator within the assess phase. Now, let's talk about the deliverables of the AWS Migration Evaluator. So once it has completed data gathering, right, it can then produce a number of different deliverables with different cost perspective based on the choices you have available to you, right? So these outputs, actually, the outputs of the AWS Migration Evaluator, these outputs can then be directly used to support the business case for migrations. And that's what's going to lead us to the next phase of the migration after building the case. Now, let's move on to the second subphase of the assess phase, right, which is migration readiness assessment, which is, again, MRA. to build the case for change. Now, a migration within its assessment or MRA is a step to objectively inform of your potential for migration success, right? So what do I mean by that? It's basically we're conducting the MRI process so that we can understand, or so that we can identify the expertise within the company, so that we can answer the question: do we have the expertise? Do we have the resources to successfully conduct this kind of AWS migration? Now that's the million-dollar question that the MRI actually process answers, right? So based on, I would say, based on the 6 categories of the cloud adoption framework, an AWS solution architect, right, from the AWS team will work with you to perform I would say, one-day assessment of your cloud capabilities and readiness by taking you through approximately, I would say, 70 questions. And in my experience, this provides super valuable insights about your readiness and can discover potential blockers, right? So are you ready for the cloud adoption journey? And if yes, or if no, what are the blockers, right? And the output of the MRA is not just like colors, not just like red and yellow, green, just like this picture over here shows. It's actually go an extra mile, and that is by providing you with recommended action plan for all critical observations that is tailored to your specific needs. And that is also very important, so that you can take that checklist and apply it on the CCOE team, which is the Cloud Center of Excellence team, so that they can take those onto their practices and come back strong for the cloud journey adoption. So that's basically what the MRI is about. It's about answering the question: are you ready for the cloud? Do you have the talent needed? Do you have the capacity? And do you have the expertise to do so? Right now, let's move on to the second phase, which is pretty much the mobilize. So the assess phase not only allows you to get your data and business case correct, it is the fundamental inputs to ensuring that you can make the correct migration choice for each type of workload and match to each type of that workload a method, which is pretty much what we're going to cover in some details. So it's basically it's a 2-step definition, right? It's about let's see. So the whole process of the assess phase allows you to pretty much define the different input. I would frame it like that. Yeah, the different input that ensuring you that you can make pretty much it's basically the different. Let me think about it. It's basically the different input in regards to different scenarios within the different parts of your AWS architecture, right? And which method would actually align within each component, whether it is a refactor, replatform, repurchase, rehost, relocate, retain, or pretty much retire. Okay, so we have this large scale organization. Again, we're talking about AWS migration on pretty much on the large scale, right? So when talking about that, we have different components, and the mission of the assess phase is to identify the proper method within each or for each component, right, within a certain timeline to meet the customer's expectations at the end of the day. So that's basically what the assess phase is about, and we'll be diving a bit deeper into each migration strategy or migration path, right, that we've pretty much mentioned in this slide. Right, now let's go first thing first over some lessons learned from the assess and mobilize phase. Okay, so firstly, firewalls, right? Actually having dedicated network and firewall resource assigned to the Cloud Center of Excellence team and to assist with a migration evaluator is very crucial. Secondary side of the desk, resourcing doesn't actually work in my experience at least. So agile teams that own the outcome does. Just remember that, right? So in order for the migration to be established properly, you need to have an agile environment put in place with agile best practices and tools and ceremonies so that you can meet some due dates so that you can pretty much keep the customer up to date within every milestone, I would say. Okay, data has gravity, and applications typically require low latency to their data store. So consider this when grouping workloads. Okay, so definitely consider the factor of data gravity. Um, I would say establish people-centric mechanisms to rescaling, right? How can you scale the know-how within the organization? Crucially important to shortlist pretty much migration partners at this stage, right? And by that, I mean, for example, that's where we come in handy as a Movieblon company or as a Movieblon AWS partner. As you might know, we are already AWS partners, right? So it's very important for you to pick the right partner to deal with, such as, for example, us, right? And you need to make sure that the partner has actually the proper tools and has established some sort of expertise in that arena as well. Finally, I would say the biggest lesson learned here is dependency mapping, right? So dependency mapping matters, and let me show you why. So dependency mapping is very typically a concern at this point, right? It simply provides us with I would say the pictorial and accurate representation of our dependencies so that we can formally understand what is talking to what and ensure we can actually replicate those communications pathways. And this is actually helpful in case of microservices architecture. Now, if you have a microservices architecture that is built on premise, you need to have a dependency mapping in place, right? In order for you to define the different dependencies across the different microservices, but also across the different data dependencies as well. And that's what pretty much this order management shows. All right, so before we go into different migration models, if you haven't used the migration evaluator, right, that we've talked about earlier and need to gather your data of what's running already, actually there is another solution, which is pretty much, so basically AWS also offers the AWS data, the AWS application discovery service, and this can be used in both agentless for VMware and agent-based methods to discover your current deployed infrastructure and then populate that data into Amazon Athena, which you can then query, of course, via, I would say, based on this schema via QuickSight, right? And you can change QuickSight to Kibana pretty much solution in place. That is based on the business choice, right? So the data from the application the data from the application, that's the application discovery service, can also be used to populate the AWS migration hub as well. So you can use the data populated from the AWS application discovery service straight with S3, then Amazon Athena QuickSight, or you can go ahead with AWS migration hub that we've talked about earlier. And let's see why. Let's see a close look on what AWS Migration Hub actually looks like. So this is a snapshot of a dashboard of the AWS Migration Hub. So it is designed to be a single location to track the progress of application migrations across AWS and partner solutions. And you can track you can basically track, as you can see here, the progress of your migrations using the migration tools that best fit your needs. All of that, of course, to help plan the migration that you are pretty much having, to make sure that you're all the time up to date with what's going on with your workload. All right, now with going over the going pretty much after the assess phase. Now, pretty much you have the inventory data in hand, right? And you can now break down the opportunity into different methods aligned to different outcomes for your applications, and that is the outcome of the assess phase within the AWS migration. Now, we call these methods the 7 R's, and the first one is relocate, right? As this schema over here shows. All right, so let's dig a bit deeper into the relocate method or migration path. For example, so here as an example, we have the VMware cloud on AWS, and that is available in, I would say, 17 regions around the world, right? And supports different vSphere installations, as well as a variety of tools and methods for hybrid migration. So this is an extremely rapid way to move your existing on-premise vSphere workload to the cloud. And by doing so, you've conducted the relocation, right? Or the relocation migration path or migration method or strategy, right? So the second R is actually for rehost, right? So this is where you're actually going to take the existing server operating system that is running the application or database, and you're going to move them both of the on-premise hypervisor and put it on top of EC2s. And pretty much when talking about the rehost method, AWS offers two services to help you: Cloud Endure Migration and the AWS Server Migration Service. Each has different benefits depending on the requirement of your workload, of course. Now, with Cloud Endure being an agent-based migration tool offering block-level replication, and AWS Server Migration Service being agentless, you can use both at pretty much no extra charge. But again, that is based on the requirements of your workload and the business requirement and the decisions of the cloud, the CCOE, right? The Cloud Center of Excellence. All right, so replatforming is pretty much the third R, as you might know, right? So replatforming is where you take the existing application or database and move it. For example, you could go from, let's say, Oracle WebLogic to Apache Tomcat, and from Oracle database to Amazon Aurora. You could just be changing out the underlying operating system from version 6 to version 7 while keeping the application database as is, right? So that is the replatforming strategy. It's basically around the platform level, right? Talking about versions, talking about servers, and we're not close enough to touching the application, right? The application is intact when talking about replatforming. All right, so when talking about replatforming, here is an approach that we've been following. So you need to create a golden Amazon machine image, or the AMI, right? At the target operating system version that you need. So you need to create an AMI with the system version of the target operating system that is required from your side, right? And then move the application, and likely you can do this by reinstalling it with a software automation product such as AWS Apps Work, using either Chef or Puppet derivatives, but that's not the subject of this this presentation. But when talking about replatform, when talking about the replatform method of migration, there is always one tip to be taken into consideration here, right? So, all right, let me ask you this: what does minimum viable refactoring look like, right? So many customers use pretty much a sprint rule or a 2-week rule, right, to conduct their replatforming. And if you can't replatform the app in 2 weeks, then you need to rehost it instead. But the most important thing here is to keep momentum going, right? And to keep that momentum intact when conducting the AWS migration. And that is very important. So the tip here is, regardless of the outcome of the replatform operation that you are conducting, if you didn't meet the due date, you can actually shift that to a rehosting operation. But you're still conducting the migration either ways, but you shouldn't stop because you didn't actually complete the replatform. You just need to switch that to rehost, which is pretty much the method that is prior to the replatform, which is a bit simpler until you can figure out the issue with the replatform. So it is a key when talking about AWS migration at large scale. All right, now for this we have let's conduct some sort of replatforming on database here, right? So we have the AWS database migration service, of course. So again, you have your existing on-premise database types on the left-hand side here, right? And you can then use the database migration service to migrate one of the many different types of target, right? So if some of your databases are very large, right, maybe many terabytes, and you don't want to be saturating your data connection link or your VPN link when you do that, right? You have the ability to use the DMS, which is the database migration service, alongside the AWS Snowball Edge, and to actually replicate the majority of your database in an encrypted format on the Snow family device. And it can then be securely shipped into a region and work in conjunction or hand-to-hand with the database migration service within AWS. So that is a very interesting business case to be taken into consideration when talking about migrating databases, especially a large size database. Right, so always saying in the replatforming here. So to complete the database migration tool, we also have the database migration playbooks, right? So these are actually, I would say, those are learning materials, so to speak. Those are a series of guides focusing on the best practices for creating successful database migration blueprints, pretty much, and currently cover, as we speak currently, the database migration playbooks. They cover 5 of the most common migrations we see, and those are pretty much listed over here in the slide, ranging from migrating from Microsoft SQL Server to Amazon or MySQL, and moving on to migrate from Oracle to Amazon Redshift. So the database migration playbooks, they cover the best practices around how you can conduct those migrations, and you can find those links on the AWS website in terms of knowledge sharing. Yeah, so all the time we're talking about database migration. Here's a great example of a customer performing a database replatform again. Pretty much, that's Samsung, right? The famous Samsung company, migrating over 1.1 billion users across pretty much continents, from Oracle to Amazon Aurora with the AWS database migration service, achieving around 44% reduction in monthly database costs, which is huge, right? You can only imagine migrating 1.1 billion users across 3 continents already using the AWS database migration service. It shows the reliability of the tool, and it shows the reliability of the platform. Okay, so some lessons to be taken into consideration. All right, some lessons that are learned in terms of database migration. Firstly, you get the code out of the database. You need to be clear. You need to be clear where business logic should live in modern steps. Secondly, one size does not fit all, right? So you need a kit bag of tools and guides in order to conduct that properly. Next, you need to conduct what we call the dry runs. Can you replicate the data, restore the data sets, and the application with all the parts needed? Does it pass your testing, measurement, and performance, right? Understand latencies before and after is also crucial to meeting the customer's performance expectations. Finally, again, finding the right partner. And that's where we come again handy as Movieblon AWS partners, right? So as part of the migration, you need to work with an AWS partner in order to achieve success. And you need to carefully pick that partner within your arena or within your industry to make sure that you're pretty much in safe waters when it comes to database migration, reducing the rate of risks. Yeah. So, all right. So, if you're hosting systems which are not, so now we're talking about, by the way, repurchasing, right? I believe that's the 5th, if I'm not mistaken, or the 6th R. So repurchasing, what repurchasing is about. If you're hosting systems which are not cool for your business, right, and maintaining Amazon machine images so that you can maintain those developed systems, you're pretty much going through a struggle, right? So let's say that your business is more customer facing, and you don't have to worry about the hustle of developing AMIs and maintaining those AMIs to the end accordingly. Now, if you're in this kind of category, then you might be, or you might consider uh, approaching the migration from a different angle, which is the repurchasing, right? So basically, repurchasing is so it's basically buying, I would say, subscriptions, right, of pre-installed, predefined software that you might find in the AWS marketplace. In the AWS marketplace itself, there are, I would say, around 5,000 software solutions for more than 2,000. I would call them independent software vendors, right? And this continues to grow and help customers to migrate to the cloud. So balance what you are building with what is already available in the marketplace. If you're building something that is already available in the marketplace, just try to capitalize on that and buy the subscription and buy the licensing. But of course, you need to get that confirmation from the upper management so that you don't have to waste time, you don't have to waste precious resources uh, pretty much on server maintaining. All right, now here is the I would say the last R and the most interesting one in terms of technicalities, which is the refactoring. Now, when can we conduct the refactoring? That is an important. What is refactoring in the first place? So when talking about refactoring, of course, in terms of AWS migration, it is the act of building the solution from scratch using AWS native tools, right? So as you can imagine, it is a lot of it's overwhelming as it is. You need to have a robust team that is knowledgeable about the different AWS tools and strategies and services, best practices, work architected framework, and so on. Because you're building a whole different stack from scratch, and you're building it on the AWS platform. And you need to keep in mind the I would say compliance and regulations that comes with the nature of the business that you are pretty much running. So you need to make sure all of that is to be met within the AWS architecture that you are implementing within the refactoring method, right? So here is, for example, here's what you use refactoring in migration. Now, if you have some of the older I would say non-86 systems, then refactoring is obvious. So we have this rusty, older servers of, again, non-86 systems that are rusty and that are becoming a burden in terms of maintenance and so on. You need to refactor that into AWS, meaning that you need to rebuild that from scratch, right? So pretty much putting teams together to tackle and move to cloud native services can be an extremely effective way to actually moving those older systems out of your data center, right? And you need to use all of these different R's, right? Starting with relocation, rehosting, refactoring, and so on in combination for an effective migration. So you need to keep that in mind. In order to have a successful, complete, robust migration, you need to have all these R's playing their roles within your solution. And that is very crucial to the balance of the solution itself or the migration process in general. Okay, so pretty much the last, I would say, the last two R's that we are having are retain and retire. And we won't go deeper when it comes to those migration paths because they're actually, we don't cover those in today's scope. Mainly the retain and the retire migration paths are mainly about I would say, putting on hold migrations. So let's say that you have a system in place and the system is tightly coupled with vendors' relationships that you've built over, I would say, 10 years, right? So I would recommend, all right, I would advise you to cherish those relationships and to keep those relationships strong so that you can actually capitalize on that. So I would recommend you to retire that solution or retire that part of the architecture, right, for later migration, but not for example, for today, right? So you need to take a lot of factors into considerations, basically business factors, political factors as well, and you need to take into consideration the relationships that are holding you with different vendors that helped you along the past years. You need to take that into consideration when thinking about migration, and that's where we have the label of retire and the label of retain as part of the AWS migration methods. So that's why we won't be able to cover those in today's webinar, because mainly those are about business concepts and strategies. Now, this is a very important concept that we're having right now. As you can see here, this is what we'd like to call it the mental process of the 7R swim lanes, right? So it's a mental process. Basically, it is, as you can see here, a matrix that gathers the different migration paths and the different migration strategies according to a timeline. Now, what this represents is actually a map of a global AWS migration. Why is that? Because let's say that a customer is coming to us for an AWS migration. What we need to do in this case is we need to set up a timeline first thing first. After setting up a timeline, we need to set up the different migration methods, right, or migration strategies, and we need to conduct the assess phase properly so that we can gather some data in regards to the different workloads to be migrated and what type of method to be followed for each workload according to a timeline again. So we might be able to get done with relocating the different parts that need to be relocated within the first month, then moving on to the rehost, then maybe conducting rehost and repurchase at the same time. Refactoring, we don't need that, or maybe we do need that. So for a small part of the architecture, we might conduct refactoring. So following that, you're giving the customer a holistic view, a 3,000 overview of what's going on within the architecture itself, what's going on within the migration, how we're planning to conduct the migration from A to Z, right? So that is very important, and that also helps us keep what we call the migration momentum, which is very, very important and crucial when talking about large migration across different teams. So if you're having a team of, I would say, a team of 50 resources or something like that, you need to keep that momentum going. So if you're having issues with the refactor, I would say of the refactor strategy, you might skip that or put it on hold and keep on working on the rehost, keep on working on the relocate and the replatform and the repurchase and so on, so that you can clear as much checks as you can while dealing with the issue that you're having with the refactor phase. So it's very important to keep that in mind as well. And here is a quick table, right, that summarizes pretty much the different R's that we went through and the percentages that are the percentages according to the use of those within an AWS migration project. Basically, again, those percentages are purely relative and they can change based on the industry of the business, the nature of the business, the urge of the business to adopt the AWS migration, and so on. So basically, as you can see here, there is a pattern of description and there is a percentage. Yes?
Excuse-moi, si tu peux juste écourter un peu parce qu'on a encore des questions par la suite.
Sure.
Et on est
Yep.
à environ 1 heure. Merci beaucoup.
Okay. Merci. All right, so to keep this quick, right, and nice, here are some lesson learned, right? Pretty much from the migrate and modernize phase, which is pretty much the last phase from the migration standpoint. So minimum viable replatforming, you need to keep that in mind. You need all the time to have some sort of an MVP approach within the migration, right? So if the 2 weeks replatforming doesn't work for you, you need to change that to 2 weeks for relocation and so on. Special migration squads, you need to have the task force team in place in order to conduct a successful migration, especially in the migrate and modernize phase, because it's purely technical. Leverage partner expertise in tooling. Again, you need to find the proper partner, and that's where we come in handy. Map credits can smooth the way again. The mapping the data can give you visibility around the different dependencies that are key players within the architecture, I would say. Minimalize the organization chart changes, visualize the waves of migrations for everyone using the AWS Migration Hub, right? Momentum and blockage removal is a key. Again, we need to maintain momentum on a large scale, and we need to, whenever there is a blockage, we need to remove that as soon as possible, and that is the duty and responsibility of the senior leader executive, right, that we mentioned in the first place. So biggest lesson learned here is post-migration cost optimization, right? So you need to keep after the migration has taken place, you need to keep running those cost optimization tests, making sure that the architecture is up to date with the business needs, and make sure that there are no cost leaks, as those can be actually heavy from the investment standpoint. So you need to shut that. You need to shut that down, and you need to make sure that there are no leaks from that side, and you're up to date. And that's pretty much it. So before we close this webinar, I'm just going to go ahead and leave you with this beautiful quote from the famous Voltaire. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. So when talking about migration, there is always a chase for perfect, right? And that's what actually ruins the whole process of the migration. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of good enough. Sometimes good enough in migration is pretty much good enough, and you can conduct business continuity with that while reaching for the perfect side of it. So that is something to keep in mind. And by doing so, we've reached the end of our interview, of our webinar. Sorry about that. Thank you so much for your time and pretty much your interest in this. And yes, it is your time to ask us questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and we'll be here to answer. Thank you. All right, so the different phases of the AWS migration. Basically, as we've mentioned previously in the webinar, we have the assess, right? And we have the modernize, we have the migrate, and we have the modernize. Assess, modernize, migrate. Those are the phases of the migration. Well, we have multiple areas of risk when it comes to migration. First thing first, let's say that your business, you have a healthcare business, and the healthcare business requires certain regulations and compliance. Now, if a healthcare company is considering, for example, migrating to AWS, they need to take into consideration the regulations and compliances of the healthcare industry. Otherwise, they will be shut down by the government, for example. Same thing goes for banking activities, or banking or financial activities. Same thing goes for research companies and so on. They need to follow some sort of compliance and regulation. So there is a risk for regulations and compliance. There is also risk, technological risk, right? There is also operational risk, and there is, most importantly, a financial risk. So for a company to adopt an AWS migration, they are already expecting benefits from that, right? They are expecting returns on the investment, because it's a heavy investment to adopt the AWS migration, and that actually adds an extra pressure on the technical team and the architecture and the architecting team to actually deliver an architectural solution that actually meet the customer's expectations in terms of finances, right? So, and that's all, and there's always a risk from that side as well. So mainly we have regulations and compliance risks, and we have also I would say, the financial risks, and we have the operational risk, technological risks. Technological risk mainly related to services that have that are not stable yet, and that have beta versions and so on. So you need to trust the mature. You need to pick up services that are mature enough to support your AWS workload. When talking about AWS migration, that's where the technological risk comes in handy. So those pretty much the risk that would that's popping on my mind right now. So the lift and shift concept. The lift and shift concept is basically we've mentioned that in the webinar. It's the rehost. So the rehost method is what we call the lift and shift, right? So basically taking, let's say we have certain applications that are running on on-premise services. We're gonna take those applications from the on-premise services, mimic the on-premise services on EC2 instances, and put those architectures there. So it's lift and shift from on-premise to EC2. It's rehost, basically. That's the lift and shift concept. And how it's different from lift and shift. The lift, think, and shift concept is what we call, again, the replatform method. So the replatform method that we've mentioned earlier in the webinar, that's actually the lift, think, and shift, and it's often called by that name. And the difference between lift and shift and lift, think, and shift is when talking about lift and shift, that's rehosting. When talking about lift, think, and shift, that's replatforming. So replatforming, we're adding light changes, right, to on the level of the platform when it comes to operating systems, versions of operating systems, and so on. We're adding those kind of layers or modifications when it comes to replatforming, or when it comes to lift, think, and shift before deploying the application in AWS. So you're taking the application, modifying the platform level of it, and putting it on EC2s, for example, or Elastic Beanstalk, or another service that would matter. Yes, that is what lift, think, and shift is about. In previous occasions, we've worked with we had a chance to work on some replatforming or lift, think, and shift projects, and basically those were around the migration of a system, IBM ODM, the IBM Operational Decision Manager, the migration of the IBM Operational Decision Manager to AWS. So we had to go with the replatform approach, right? And the idea was to migrate the whole Java project because it was Java based. We had to host it in some sort of an AWS Lambda function, in which we've managed to actually control its different versions of that application, which is replatforming 101. So I think we're running out of questions here. Correct me if I'm wrong, Leila.
Oui, on n'a plus de questions. Du coup, merci beaucoup, Hakim, pour cette présentation. C'était très enrichissant. Et on espère se revoir pour un prochain webinaire dans les semaines qui suivent. Ciao.
Definitely. Thank you so much for hosting me, and thank you all for taking the time and joining the webinar. It was pretty much interesting, and I hope you've pretty much learned different practices when it comes to AWS migration, and you've gained knowledge from that side. Until the next webinar, inshallah. Thank you.
Merci. Bonne journée. Au revoir.